It's time for episode 113 of The Crisis Show here on YouTube and wherever you have this link around the world. Good evening from New York. My name is Rich Klein. I'm president of Rich Klein Crisis Management and founder and host of The Crisis Show, now in its fourth year. So tonight I want to make a case study out of, and actually I'm not making the case study, it already is a case study in crisis management and crisis communications, and that would be Chipotle Mexican restaurant, that very popular chain of restaurants. There are, I believe, 1,700 restaurants in the world under that name. It was founded in 1993, and the founder and CEO is someone by the name of Steve Ellis. So let me give you the short story in case you haven't been reading the media and paying attention to this. Chipotle became embroiled in a foodborne illness crisis back in late October and early November, when there were incidents that had started to be reported in the Pacific Northwest. E. coli was the culprit there, and there were 43 restaurants closed in the Pacific Northwest, and particularly Washington and Oregon. And so that was the first wave of the crisis, if you will. And fast forward till the past week or so, there was a separate foodborne illness event, multiple stage event, and that was the norovirus that impacted somewhere between 140 and 153 Boston College students. And that is still under investigation as well. So you have this two-pronged crisis, one that started in late October, early November, and another one that I believe started in early December. And it's really put the company in crisis mode, as you can imagine. The stock took a huge dive initially. The good news for them is that it did bounce back after Steve Ellis apologized. But there's a lot of pieces to the story I want to lay out for you. And again, a case study is always used to educate. And that's what we want to do on this show, is educate you, the business leaders, about how to prepare for a crisis, how to respond to a crisis, and how to rebuild your reputation once that crisis begins to subside. So we're going to take a look at this in the next 20 minutes or so. And the first thing I want to do is play a clip for you of Steve Ellis on the Today Show from December 10th, almost a week ago, talking about what happened and making some kind of an apology here. So let me pull it up for you. I'd like you to watch this clip, and then I'm going to give you my thoughts on it.
Founder and co-CEO is with us now exclusively. Mr. Ellis, good morning. Good to have you. Good morning. I was watching the tape. I was watching your face watching the tape as well. This is a hard time for you guys.
It's a really tough time. But first, I have to say I'm sorry for the people who got sick. They're having a tough time, and I feel terrible about that. And we're doing a lot to rectify this and to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Let's start in Boston. We'll work our way back to the Pacific Northwest. Yes. The norovirus is what sickened these people. 120 people, it seems, up in Boston. The restaurant is closed down. They've been issued some violations. The cleanup is underway. Are you convinced that you've contained this now, that more people won't report being sick?
Well, so in regard to the E. coli, there was one particular period of time from mid-October until early November that appeared that's when the outbreak occurred, and the reporting of the illnesses came out over a long period of time.
So you're saying in Boston you could have more cases reported?
Well, with the norovirus, probably you've heard that this is the extent of it, but it's a disease that is very easily passed. And so it spreads very, very quickly from person to person.
And you convinced when you reopen that store in Brighton up near Boston that people will not be getting sick if they go back to eat there?
When we reopen, the restaurant will be completely sanitized, and every single employee will have been tested and assured that they do not have norovirus.
Now let's go back to the Pacific Northwest. The E. coli outbreak there started in early November. 43 stores shut down. Dozens of people got sick. It's my understanding that after weeks of investigating this, the FDA has not found an exact source of that E. coli bacteria. Is that true?
It's true, and we've had teams looking at this. We closed our restaurants out of an abundance of caution and tested all the ingredients, surfaces, thousands and thousands of tests, Matt, and they all came back negative for E. coli. And so if there's a silver lining in this, it is that we have looked at every single ingredient that we use at Chipotle. We use 64 ingredients that we bring in. So from farm through the distribution network, how we prepare the food, how we cook the food, and how we serve the food. We've had a team of epidemiologists and food safety experts to raise our standards from the already industry norms that
but you call it a silver lining, and I think it might be troubling, because if you can't identify the source, how do you go about eliminating it in the future?
Well, unfortunately, what got people sick was no longer in the system by the time they even showed symptoms, and so unfortunately, you'll not find that. But the silver lining comment is that it has caused us to put in place practices that our epidemiologist expert, Dr. Samanpour, says will put us 10 to 15 years ahead of industry norms. And I believe this will be the safest restaurant to eat at.
A lot of damage has been done, Mr. Els. Stock prices dropped double digits since this began in early November. That's a big loss on the bottom line. Two parts to this. First of all, financially, can the company recover?
Well, certainly, but that's not what we're thinking about now. We're thinking about the safety and quality of our ingredients, to put in place practices that will not enable this to happen again. Practices that are so far above industry norms today, we will be the safest place to eat. And that is our commitment. Much like Food with Integrity, to bring the very best ingredients to fast food, we're now saying we have practices that will make it the safest place to eat.
And finally, real quickly, if you can, there are critics who say, Mr. Els, that this company started with a great idea and then grew too fast, that it just took off at a rate where you couldn't keep control of things like sourcing and quality control, and even things that would affect the public health. Is there some merit to that claim?
I don't think so, because if you look at the quality of our ingredients over time, we've made great strides in sourcing better quality food. Meats without antibiotics or growth hormones, more organics, more local and sustainably raised foods. This was a very unfortunate incident, and I'm deeply sorry this happened. But the procedures we're putting in place today are so above industry norms that we are going to be the safest place to eat.
Steve Els, it's good of you to join us this morning. I know you've got an awful lot going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So thank you for indulging me in that, watching that clip. I think there's a lot of education there in watching that interview from a lot of angles. Let's start with the big picture. Folks, when you're in a crisis, very often your public relations people, your crisis managers who are experienced in this area will advise you to do some interviews to tell your story, to be the face of the company. So I credit Chipotle here for putting Steve Ellis out there. It's very important in a crisis to put your founder, your CEO, in front of the media, to own up to the situation, to apologize, and show some compassion. So that was a good idea at some level. In other words, it was good to put someone out there to be in the media. I would have done something a little differently, though. I would have advised Chipotle to, instead of seeking out the Today Show or Good Morning America, for instance, I would have instead created a YouTube video so that you can control the entire message to the world. So when you use the media to tell your story, you don't know what's going to happen. This was actually pretty much what we call a softball interview. Matt Lauer allowed Steve Ellis to talk, and he came away fairly untarnished, if you will. There was no gotcha moment in that interview. I think that Steve Ellis could definitely use some more media training to stay on his messaging. And I would have liked to have seen more content. I would have liked to have heard more about what the company may be doing for the victims. The apology was, we're sorry this happened. And folks, right there, don't use "we're sorry this happened." make it specific. We're sorry for the people's for the people who got sick and their families. We're going to make sure this doesn't happen again. After that is fine, but you're not just sorry it happened, because then it sounds like we're sorry we got caught, or we're sorry things went wrong. You want to really be directed. In a YouTube video, for instance, you can look directly in the camera, just like I am right now, and say, I am really sorry that our company's food safety fell short of our very high standards, and we're going to do everything we can to make it right, rather than looking at an interviewer with your head down and saying, oh, we're sorry this happened. Big difference in communication. So real important, particularly when you're on television. So that's something that caught me in analyzing this. The other thing on the plus side, I liked when near the end of the interview, Matt Lauer asked Steve Ellis about the impact of the financials from this crisis. And I liked his answer, which was, yes, we're going to recover, but that's not our concern right now. Our first priority is safety. He could have gone further and said our first priority are our customers and the people who fell ill. I would have liked to see him go a little further, but he was on the right track. Folks, in a crisis, you always have to put people before profits. You never want to seen as rushing back to profitability or getting the stock back up. The stock did, of course, rebound very nicely today by about 2.5%. It's now back up to 568, but it had taken a big dip at the outset of this crisis. One of the reasons I think that the stock recovered was that Steve Ellis and the company took out a full-page ad today in 61 daily newspapers. And it really wasn't an apology. I mean, it was and it wasn't. It was characterized as an apology, but it really was much more of, we're sorry, and here's all the things we're going to do to improve our food safety. It was a kind of a half-hearted apology and more of a PR effort, if you will, to talk about what they're going to do to make it right so that it doesn't happen again, or at least to minimize the possibility that this will happen again, these kind of foodborne illnesses. Again, just to recap real quickly, in late October, early November, you had E. coli outbreak in the Pacific Northwest. There was some, apparently, at least according to my colleague Bill Mahler Clark, who's one of the top foodborne safety illness attorneys in the country. He talked about some other illnesses caused by Chipotle restaurants in between that time and the time in which more recently, when the Boston University students became ill from the norovirus. I think it was about 140 or 150 of them, and depending on the numbers you read. One of the other things in the interview that I did not hear that was missed by Steve Ellis, and again, had I been advising him and the company, I would have made sure that in those messages, whether it's in the Today Show interview or in a full page ad or any other way you're going public with your critical audiences about your apology, he failed to mention the ongoing Food and Drug Administration investigation and the Centers for Disease Control. So there are two investigations going on right now to get to the bottom of this. One thing you always want to do when you are in a crisis situation is let the public know that you are fully cooperating with your regulators. And depending what industry you're in, you guys already know who your regulators are. In this case, it's very obvious, the FDA and the Centers for Disease Control. And folks, if you're in the food industry, for instance, you know that your primary, your worst case nightmare for a crisis is foodborne illnesses. That's except for terrorism, that's probably your next. Right after that is going to be your next concern. So it's really important then that you think about long before the crisis hits what you can do to head off a crisis like this, to be prepared for a crisis like this in your messaging and your strategy. So this was what I liked about what they did. They pretty quickly, at least after all the information came out, they said that they introduced this food safety plan. Let me just show you real quickly here. They did a good job of using social media to get this message out. So, folks, in a crisis situation, Facebook and Twitter are your friends. These are the two social media channels you must be on when you're in the middle of a crisis. And they did a good job here, as you can see, of posting of this letter from Steve Ellis. I like the way they pulled out this quote as well. But if you click on this graphic here, it takes you to their comprehensive food safety plan. So that was good in terms of information, and it's signed by by Steve Ellis. So that's a good thing to do. They also, I'm going to switch over here to their Twitter account. They mimicked that food safety plan on their Twitter account. They released it at the same time today. Really good use of social media. Where I have where I have a problem with the company, however, is that if you scroll down in the chronology, the timeline, if you will, from November until today, you'll see a lot of promotional stuff going on from the outset of the crisis. Let me just take you back here. Maybe it was on Facebook. Let me just see. Okay, so here on November 9th is the first moment they talk about their crisis. We've taken a number of steps to ensure our food is safe to eat in Oregon and Washington. So, of course, this was the beginning of the crisis, November 9th. But look here. A week later, they're promoting their products, November 17th. Okay, they're still promoting on November 17th 2 or 3 promotional ads about their products on November 19th, and then this goes on and on until you get to today. So between November 9th, let me just make sure I have the date straight. Between November 9th and December 16th, there's only 2 mentions of the crisis on Twitter and Facebook. So let me just come back here. Folks, that's a real problem. You never want to be seen advertising your products in the middle of a high-profile crisis. You had a lot going on with the E. coli and the norovirus outbreak, and it's not a good time on social media or anywhere else you have to stop advertising and stop your marketing and put all hands on deck to getting to resolving the crisis and recovering your reputation. You're not going to recover your reputation by promoting your products that still could be endangered, that still could be dangerous to consumers. Not a good idea. And this is just really offensive to me. I've been talking about this for years, since companies started using the internet on their websites. I was very concerned about this, and I've been very vocal about it over the years and will continue to be. You have to deal with the crisis. Now, another choice you have here, folks, is just stay off social media. In other words, not stay off the complaints. You got to do your customer service, but don't. And if you're not going to post about the crisis because your attorneys told you not to or whatever, then don't put anything on social media. But you look really bad. It's poor taste, if you will, to put a graphic up of your food when people are getting sick during that time, and there hasn't been when the investigations haven't resolved themselves at all, when there's no facts to show that you did everything possible and people are safe now. So until you're out of the woods, you don't want to be advertising and marketing your products. Not a good idea. So only focus on the crisis behind the scenes and with the media and on social media when you're in a crisis situation. So Chipotle gets good marks for using social media to tell its story, to tell what it's going to do. It gets bad marks for a weak apology, and also gets bad marks for not mentioning that it's going to fully cooperate with the regulators to find out what happened. That's not good at all. You have to work with your government officials. And one of the things that's really important, folks, is long before a crisis happens, you want to be building relationships with critical audiences like the government agencies that regulate your business and or your industry. You want to build relationships so that when you're in a crisis, you can make a phone call and have a meeting and already be ahead of the game and towards resolving it. You don't want that first call to be from a regulator that, hey, we've discovered you guys have a problem, and you have no relationship with that agency commissioner or health official in your community, right? So you want to build those relationships long before you're in a crisis situation. Really important, and it goes a long way to minimizing the damage in the court of public opinion. And that's the final thing I want to say here, folks. Chipotle has recovered its stock. It probably will recover its reputation at some point. But to do that, it has to continually instill confidence in the court of, what I call the court of public opinion. Yes, there will be lawsuits that come out of this. I'm sure there'll be a class action, and they will take some hits on this, no question. But it's the court of public opinion that is very important. Even if down the road your company is clear legally of any wrongdoing, let's say, and I'm not saying it's going to happen at Chipotle, but I've seen this happen. You have to focus on the court of public opinion, and that means social media. That means continuing to do interviews. I see that Steve Ellis sat down with the Associated Press today. That was a real good PR move to sit down with the biggest wire service, because that will send that story out around the world and on the internet and beyond, and on social media channels. A really good selection of an interview, of a media outlet to do another interview. I also would suggest that Steve Ellis should probably get some more media training so he comes across a little more confident. What I did like about him, he seemed like a real person. He didn't come across as arrogant, but he seemed a little nervous and not so, and he wasn't really ready for some of those questions. And you really need intense media training before you go on the Today Show in the middle of a crisis. I think he could have done a lot better. I think his messaging could have been better. And had he been drilled a lot tougher back in the home office to get ready for that interview. So there's some things that you could take away from this as a case study. But again, it's good to put your CEO and founder out there when you're facing a serious crisis like this. You need to do that. I would have, again, created a YouTube video so you can control the message and tell your full story and not be in a defensive mode. Interestingly enough, that the company believes that this was a good interview. And I say that because they copied this Today Show link that I just showed you and put it on their website. They didn't have to do that. They did it because I think they came out looking pretty good. And they're probably right. In a crisis like this, it could have been a lot worse. Matt Lauer did offer what I call a softball interview, but it wasn't a polished interview by any means. And there were a lot of messages missed by Chipotle that would have helped regain their reputation a little bit better. Anyway, let me know what you think. Please use hashtag The Crisis Show. Check out that full page there. Do a Google search of Chipotle. Look at the news stories. Let me know what you think. And we'll take a look at this a few months from now with some guests, and we'll see if and how they've recovered their reputation, or if things have gotten worse. We'll take another look at it. But certainly, I think this is an excellent case study, certainly in the food industry and beyond, for a serious crisis situation. Things that you have to do, things that you need to do better, and things that you shouldn't do. And so we'll revisit this again. Thank you so much for watching. And because this is probably going to be our last episode of 2015, thank you all for watching this past year. Wishing you all a happy holiday and a happy new year wherever you are in the world. Thanks again, and we'll see you in 2016.